All right, Ashley, so thank you again for doing this video and or doing this Chronically PWS video with me and the questions that you presented to me earlier late last week. If you want to tell to the audience or community about your story with PWS.
Yeah, I've always been open with our story with Ramsey. I'm Ashley Polk. My son, Ramsey, happens to have PWS. He is 10 months old as of Monday. So back in November 11th, I had him 11/11 at 11/11 after
Awesome.
11 hours of labor. It was a home birth, which was planned, which is actually really rare for a PWS baby because most come early or you're induced early because they can already tell in the womb that they're not growing or moving. We had no signs of that. He was actually 9 days overdue. He had been growing, good weight, felt movement, head down, all that. Successful home birth, no real issues. He had a tongue tie, so he had a few troubles latching, but he was able to breastfeed. And but I have 3 other daughters, or children, and one of them had RSV. So my son and I were quarantined in my bedroom. We were trying to quarantine to keep him safe from catching that. Well, we were unsuccessful. At 10 days old, at 9 days old that night, he started showing signs of some wheezing. He was awake. He had been alert, awake, eating. The midwife would check him. He was doing great. No one had any concerns. He'd already seen an ENT for his tongue tie had it clipped. No concerns there. So, which is rare. Most are rushed off to an ICU and put in feeding tube, all that. Ramsey was doing good. So he was a quiet baby. He never really cried, but I thought that was my reward for having 3 loud, dramatic daughters.
Yeah.
That I have 3 chill little son. I mean, and he was being fed, clean. He's constantly had mommy, so why would he cry? So to me, it wasn't a concern. Well, I saw that he was starting to wheeze, so first thing in the morning, I called the doctor. Hey, there's RSV in the house. I'm concerned he has it. They immediately make us a 9 o'clock appointment. 9 o'clock on the dot. I'm in the doctor's office. A little bit of time, he had started going downhill fast. Crashing. 5 a.m., he had a great breastfeed. By 9 a.m., he was lifeless. So they were like, take him to UK, which is our major hospital here, Children's Hospital. Get him there immediately. I take him up there. They're immediately doing a spinal tap, putting him on all the oxygen and stuff. He had a temperature of 95. His heart rate was in the 220s. He was crashing. He was actively dying. The next day, he was put on life support for 4 days. And we ended up spending a total of 20 days in the PICU, a pediatric ICU. They were convinced he had SMA, which is spinal muscular atrophy. Basically told us they didn't know if he would live, that go home, enjoy your Christmas while we wait a diagnosis. This may be your only one. It was basically sent home to die. But I had thought he was getting better, but they didn't treat me that way. Well, we finally did get a diagnosis, and it turned out to be PWS. And no one had ever suggested it to us because he doesn't have any of the standard red flags. It hadn't been on our minds. And when I had looked up during the hospital, they called him a floppy baby a lot because the RSV accentuated the low tone. That really wasn't that bad before he got sick. And when PWS came up, prader-willi syndrome as a low tone cause, I read everything and I said, well, that's not Ramsey. Swipe, what's the next, diagnosis? Because I didn't think, that was him, but here we are. So, and then ever since then, I started an Instagram channel, which is Ramsey's PWS Adventures, which it's just documenting and presenting what the syndrome is, how we have faced it, his challenges we've overcome, how we struggle, how we accomplish, and showing that not only is it a spectrum that kids can succeed and do well, but just to show other moms and people that you're not alone, that there's others out there, there's other families out there to connect and to relate to, And now I'm seeing that new moms are looking to Ramsey and I for guidance or as goals to set. So that's where we are. And then we found you in February, and it was a game changer for us because for the first couple of months, it was all doom and gloom that PWS is this horrible thing. He's going to starve all the time, and he's going to be mentally disabled, physically disabled. They can't drive. They don't live independent lives. Just on and on and on, and soul-crushing for a parent. So I was desperately scouring the internet for any hope, and I found Chronically PWS on YouTube. And I remember it so clearly. I was cooking dinner, watching YouTube videos, and there you are, this intelligent man articulately describing what you've lived through and your diagnosis and everything about it. And if the title hadn't said that you had PWS, I would never have known it. And to hear that you were married, that you're driving, that you have a child, all these things we've been told, just give up for your child, it brought hope and positivity to our family and was this light that, hey, it's not a dark tunnel. There is hope. So
absolutely there's a lot of hope with it, and it's a long road, and it's challenges, and I think that there's a lot, even the struggles that you have are kind of character shaping, and I think Ramsey's just got this wonderful future ahead of him, and every day, every new Instagram video that you post is it's inspiring to see what he's doing. So as I told you earlier today, it lets me know, seeing others succeed kind of lets me kind of look back on how far I've come and how I want other kids to do that as well. I want other kids facing prader-willi syndrome to know that those doors can be opened and to know it's not hopeless. And a lot of adversity that you face with prader-willi syndrome, and I think there's a lot of it, like you were saying, assumptions. As time goes on, there's going to be more awareness of Prader-Willi, and I think it's going to be more realized that it is a spectrum. And I think the general categories of diagnosis are going to broaden. There's going to be more categories of diagnosis with it, so because there's going to be more different expressions of it that kind of show up in the population. Kids like Ramsey, people like myself, it's important that we're out there for our community to kind of say, hey, it's not all just the prognosis.
In my mind, so many people with Prader-Willi cannot express fully or articulately what it's like to have it or to live with it the day to day. And so hopefully Ramsey has done so well physically. We still don't know how he will be mentally yet, but if he keeps for like you or Ramsey one day, or there's the girl Justice and so many others, I think it's so important for you guys to do the expressing, the talking, because you are the best advocates for Prader-Willi. A mom can only say so much, but I've not lived with it or felt it. Doctors, they don't even have someone in their home with it, right? So to have you and people like you be able to share what it's like, it means so much more than anything I could say for my son.
Like I said, I feel like that somewhat of a responsibility to do this, and like you said, there's not a lot of other adults out there that are communicating. I've met a few online, but not very active in terms of be examples or just to share their experiences. There was one gentleman I know that has a bachelor's degree in accounting, but he still lives. He doesn't live independently, but he's an accountant. Beyond his non-independent living, he lives in a place with several other gentlemen. So I know there's these other people out there that are, like Ramsey, like myself, and like some of the other kids that I've met that are just not atypical. And I really don't even think there is a typical with Prader-Willi. There's just not. Right. It's just so varied. It's so varied.
Well, the whole idea of it being a spectrum is just so expressed. it expressed, because when, like, for as a parent, when we're told it, that your child has this, and of course we Google, we go on the internet, even with the doctors or the geneticists trying to tell you what it is, that's not something that's hardly brought up or said. They basically list off all these bullet points that are supposed to be facts. Your kid will have this and this. But that's not the case. The majority of the things that an infant is supposed to have with PWS, my son does not have. And I know others who are like that, where they maybe have 2 or 3. Yeah, if they told us in the beginning, hey, there is this wide range, it wouldn't be such a just stab to the heart the way they do it now. And that would be the goal. By the time, if the next generation of kids are diagnosed, their parents aren't being told the same way we were.
And that's the sad thing, because I think it's easy to resign yourself to the diagnosis and then to pigeonhole who you're going to be based around that diagnosis. And it's tragic. There's so many people out there that could be so much more than what they think they only can be. And I think that's the responsibility of the adults like myself, and what will be adults like Ramsey have to stand up and say, hey, you can be more than your diagnosis. You can do more things.
When you were talking about, like, yourself and the accountant and so many that could speak out but don't, that kind of goes to one of the questions I had, where do you think some of it is because of the stigma or assumptions that people have around prader-willi syndrome, and that if they could, quote unquote, pass as typical or normal, that they don't want people to know they have it if they don't have to? Like, that's why they kind of just live their lives and don't advertise, hey, I have prader-willi syndrome.
I do think it's a hard thing to communicate as a syndrome, because for some people, it's almost invisible that they have prader-willi, or it's just like, something's different about this person, but people don't know enough about prader-willi to assign it to that phenotype or how that person is. So people don't know enough about it. Not only do I have to say it's prader-willi, I have to explain what that is, and how that affects me. And then when I think, because we have this heralded condition with hyperphagia, that you explain that to people, and the assumption is, well, that's why you're fat, or that's why that's why you like to eat, is because of your condition. Well, it's far more complex than just that's why you're fat. Well, I'm fat because of my metabolism, because of my hyperphagia, and there's a lot of different things that are going on there. When you look at conditions and obesity, we always want to assign some other underlying condition to it anyway as a culture. And then if you put that as the heralded condition of Prader-Willi, then it just becomes a reason why this group of people is heavy or different, or obese. So I think we kind of try to outrun the hyperphagia. And going back to what you were saying is, I didn't know there were people that weren't hyperphagic that had Prader-Willi. The first thing they tell you.
I can name at least 6, like either teenagers or older, who do not have hyperphagia at all. No food, insecurities or anything. It's just, and now they all have the same subtype, but they are there. They don't have it. They still have the diet, but they don't have the hunger.
Which is really interesting, and I think it goes back to the development of the hypothalamus, and why they've said that hyperphagia comes in stages throughout the child's life. You have those developmental stages that are real prominent, and they'll say, okay, they're going to be extremely hyperphagic after this point, and then it'll taper off, and then it'll get really bad or whatever. But now, since they've started staging that out, it does seem like as you grow, as you get older, that there's times where you're more hyperphagic or less hyperphagic. A lot of things, like I was thinking the other day, some of the worst times for me hyperphagically have been when I had other things going on. If I had a allergic reaction, or I had some gastritis or something, that would aggravate it. It goes back to that, we need the communication, we need the examples, we need people talking about these things, because there's kids that can't communicate the fact that I'm really bad because my stomach hurts, because I have gastritis, or this is driving me crazy because I have this, you know. And it's, if I can advocate for them who can't say it, I think that will be helpful too, you know, going on. But what you were saying, as far as getting back to your question, I'm going to try to roll this back. That, you know, the stigma of it is it's hard to explain, and people want to understand obesity in their own ways. And they think if you just say, I have prader-willi and it's about hyperphagia, that they're just going to assign it to disability and not to an overall condition. The way we've learned it is oversimplified.
Friday, I had Ramsey at the PWS clinic for his checkups. The body is physically made up different. Apparently, the subcutaneous fat on people with PWS is displaced differently than on a quote-unquote typical person. So it's the actual makeup of the body and how you carry your weight and fat is totally different. It's all of it. You're fighting it so much. Well, and then the other stigma too, you know, like I said, Google is like the enemy for prader-willi, I really think, especially for males. But low IQ, mental disability, yeah, here you said you went to college, right? You've had a career with good job that you would want to get with a college degree. No, it's not all this. There is more, you know, there are other options out there now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to another thing about the communication that you get online, because it's not adequate. It really isn't. And when they say low IQ, it doesn't really point to the fact, is there a specific learning disability that people with Prader-Willi syndrome face that gives them low IQ? It doesn't really explain itself. It just said low IQ, and that's all you get. That's all we're going to let you know. I started off, I had a lot of learning delays and a lot of problems and some speech issues and things like that I had to overcome. I feel like if we could just even, you know, expand out on these little areas, maybe the medical science right now doesn't have faith in the populace to kind of absorb everything. Low IQ, but typically this is what we see. So there's developmental evaluations. You know, you go to developmental peds and they'll do all their magic and figure out exactly what your problems are. But there's not like typically we see this with the low IQ and or the learning disabilities. And I think it's all assailable, you know, by an individual. I think your IQ is kind of flexible as time goes on. If you live in a room, you're going to think that you live in a room, but, you know, if you open up a book, you're going to learn to, you know, live outside of that room. So
your environment and your stimulus, as far as your parents go,
yeah,
a huge difference. I think if you're not being stimulated, or, you know, like if the parents have given up, which I felt that so many times, I would cry every night. But, you know, if you've got to keep going and keep, you know, trying, hoping that it goes back. I think there are so many out there that don't or can't, or the kids aren't being
pigeonholed. Yeah.
So many, even in America here, they're given up at birth for adoption with that diagnosis. We were at the conference that you were at,
yeah, and
several stories where the parents were approached in the NICU by nurses after they got their diagnosis, saying, you know, you have the option for adoption to give them up, and some do choose that, and it's like, you know, I understand both ways. I understand how I could never give up my child, but I can understand how others would, and it's like those children, you know, that are given up probably aren't going to get what they need to succeed, or could have been more, you know. And so it's all about the whole picture, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, always. I think that's a big part of what needs to change online with the newer generation who are getting the growth hormone. There's just so much research and just proven in the people that you meet now, the teenagers who have been on growth hormone since tiny babies, their IQs are higher. Their physical bodies are different. They're not all overweight now. The majority of kids that we follow with Prader-Willi are skinny, are decent weights. They're just typical looking kids, and majority of the ones I was talking about who didn't get the hyperphagia did start growth hormone as babies, you know. I don't know if that's the connection or not, but
I definitely believe it. Yeah, I mean, if they say the hypothalamus is too small, and that's the big culprit, then the growth hormone early on causes the entire body to grow. So it's going to, of course, get better.
So I think there really needs to be that push to share, hey, this is how things were, and unfortunately, the past generations didn't have access to this growth hormone, and these were the outcomes. But then over here is a new generation that have had access to growth hormone and new dieting and therapy plans, and this is how these are turning out. And within both sections, it's a huge spectrum. Seeing as it is a very rare disorder, or for us, the first time we ran into someone else who had PWS was at the PWS clinic in Columbus, Ohio, which is 2.5 hours away from here. 2 months ago, that we actually met someone in our own state that had it. So for you, growing up in a time where internet, household thing, and this is so rare that you don't really want to run into someone at Walmart with it. When was the first time you met someone else with prader-willi?
I think I might have been 8 or 9 years old, and we got connected, and it was a really funny way, because I think that for patient privacy, doctors didn't want to say, I know this kid or whatever, and we actually had a nurse that knew somebody and said, maybe give this person a call. They might tell you something that's interesting. So I actually ran across a person, and you're going to think this is kind of odd, that at the time, of course, he was older than me. I think I was 8 and he was 13. We didn't have very much in common, but he was even more high functioning than I was at the time. He was doing his own thing. He was playing guitar and getting ready to go to high school. So, and for him, going back to that stigmatism that adults have, that they just want to live typical lives, he was fully in it. He really didn't consider his diagnosis beyond 1 or 2 things to be substantial for him to really have to say anything to anybody about it. I went over to his house a couple times and we hung out, but we just didn't have a lot in common. He was there just to make me feel good, basically. That was really the only person that I met growing up until I went to the first chapter meeting for PWSA, I don't even think it was through PWSA North Carolina. It was just a prader-willi group. It didn't really stick with my mom that she felt like we would go back. So I really didn't get to experience a lot of our wonderful community growing up and to see what other kids are doing.
Speaking about your mom as a mom with a higher functioning kid, like Ramsey right now is doing so well physically. Honestly, when he's awake, he doesn't have low tone, and the doctors have said that, he's hitting all his muscles, so it can be hard or awkward to be with other parents or in those group settings with parents whose kids aren't doing as well or have more of the typical symptoms of the really low tone and they aren't hitting their milestones and delay. Hard to relate, because even though Ramsey and us as a family have had struggles and still have issues, we don't have the same kinds or as much as some of these other families. Yeah. And it's just hard, and you don't want to feel like you're bragging about your kid, but and you want to share them, but at the same time, are you hurting people more than you're helping? It's an awkward place to be. So I'm sure your mom probably felt that as a mother of you.
Yeah, I definitely think that, and that was pretty much my experience. Not really communicating the fact that I had Prader-Willi syndrome, and other than my family that knew about it, the stigma of not being able to explain it to people because it's so complicated, an easy thing to grasp, and when you try to put it in layman's terms, it just sounds like an excuse for something, which it's not. But yeah, that's kind of how I felt about it growing up.
Talk about stigma. When Ramsey was first diagnosed, and I was in a group of fellow furniture artists, and I announced that my son's been diagnosed with this. One of the women in it was familiar with prader-willi syndrome, and the first thing she said was, "Oh man, that sucks." Like, I still was very unaware of the full reality of prader-willi, and was, just got out of the ICU for 20 days with him and having a hard time, and that was the reaction I'm getting from people. That sucks. Like,
now, I do have to tell you of a family member of a family member through marriage. My second cousin's husband's niece has a son.
You're in the South when you go that far back. My second cousin's husband.
But this is the cool part. This is the cool part. Her child has PWS, and she was at the convention and said, "Do you know this person?" And it took a few minutes for us to kind of put it together. I'm like, "Yeah, that's Barbara, and that's my cousin." She's like, "Yeah, well, my uncle's married, to your cousin." So the world gets smaller, it really does. And that's the thing. Our community is just, unfortunately, it's going to get bigger, but it's going to help each other. It's we're all going to kind of prop each other up and hopefully support each other through these trials. You were saying, as far as you can feel guilty being with other parents and seeing the trials that you face that are different. The thing about prader-willi is it's such a bag of mystery, because there's going to be things that just pop up. And you pointed one out about the body composition. There's things about every system in the body that's different or can be different. Not to say it will or won't, but it can be different. And I always thought, it was always the running line with me and my mom. I'm like, well, is there going to be anything else that's different? I'm going to have to wear these orthopedic shoes for 4 years and look like Ronald McDonald for 4 years. Is there anything else that's going to be crazy about my life? But you just have to kind of roll with the punches and have a sense of humor about it.
As much as I've bashed the internet, it's also been such a helpful tool for parents and kids to connect, to see the spectrum, to connect with other mothers and bond, or fathers, and share stories. My husband's in the dad's group for PWS kid, so because a lot of times stuff is geared towards mothers, because majority of the time mothers are caregivers and dads get left out. So that's really helped him. And to be able to see, my kid has this symptom, and this is how this mom, and this mom did this. Okay, so that gives me ideas, or sharing what worked for their kid, or diets and recipes. And, it's making it easier. Like, my goal is to one day, when you Google PWS, it's not this morbidly obese, boy with his eyes blacked out and genitalia, and then over next to it saying, all the horrible things. Like, I want a picture of Jared or Ramsey or all these other beautiful children, no matter where they are on the spectrum, to pop up with their clothes on.
One of the worst things is the monster painting, the Renoir era monster painting. As we end the first part of this video, I thought it was important to talk a little bit about Eugenia Martinez Viejo portrait titled The Monster. She was a real person who lived in 1674 in Spain, and there are two paintings. I will not show the other painting in this video of her undressed. This was painted in 1680, really just portraying her as she was. I don't think there was any creative license used to display her as something that she wasn't here. And historians have stated this as such, that she most likely suffered from prader-willi syndrome, given her short stature and her obesity and the way she was carrying herself. And this may be something that your children face, that they learn about in school, within art history, or just history in itself about this painting. And I think it's important to give it strong context within our community, and to kind of honor the fact that Eugenia was a person, that she lived a life, and she's not just the subject of this painting, that she was a real person